The roar of stolen engines shattered the quiet Texas night as a gleaming Harley vanished into the darkness, taken from a war veteran who carried more than memories. Furious Marines closed in, their eyes burning with a vow not just to reclaim a bike, but to restore broken honor. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The afternoon sun hung low over Cedar Creek, casting long shadows on the cracked pavement. The town had that quiet, unhurried feel of places where everybody knew your name, or at least thought they did. But that evening, the calm was about to be shattered by a reckless impulse fueled by teenage bravado and the careless thrill of owning something forbidden. Jake leaned against the faded brick wall of a convenience store, his friends gathered in a loose circle around him, laughing and boasting about their weekend plans. Then, through the corner of his eye, something caught his attention. Parked right across the street was a vintage motorcycle, its chrome shining like a beacon in the dying light. Not just any motorcycle. This was a 1967 Harley-Davidson, lovingly maintained, every inch telling a story of pride and endurance. Jake's gaze drifted over the details, the custom paint that gleamed under the orange glow, the Marine Corps emblem that sat just below the handlebars, and the faded but still visible Semper Fi sticker, a silent testament to loyalty and honor. He didn't know much about bikes, hell, most days he barely cared, but this one felt different. It wasn't just about the metal and leather, it was about what it represented. Bet the old guy who owns this never sees it coming, Jake said, voice low, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. His friends exchanged looks, a mixture of excitement and doubt flickering in their eyes. They were restless, hungry for something to break the monotony of small-town life. The bike was a challenge, a dare dangling right in front of them. Breaking the lock was easier than they expected. A few deft moves with bolt cutters, a clank, and the chain fell loose. Heartbeats quickened. The bike roared to life beneath Jake's hands like a wild animal released from its cage. The roar echoed off the silent houses, a sudden explosion of noise that shattered the evening calm. They sped down the street, adrenaline pumping, laughter spilling into the night air. Daring stunts followed, a wheelie here, a reckless swerve there. The stolen bike became a symbol of freedom, of power in their hands for the briefest of moments. Jake didn't stop to consider the consequences, didn't think about the man who had poured his heart into that machine. To them, it was just a prize, a trophy to show off before it was gone. But across the street, inside a modest home, Robert Miller heard the sudden revving engine, his routine evening shattered by a noise that wasn't supposed to be there. He stepped outside, worn hands gripping the doorway, eyes narrowing. The empty spot where his Harley had stood was an emptiness that ripped through him like a gut punch. Robert wasn't just a man who owned a bike. He was a Vietnam War veteran, a survivor of nightmares many couldn't imagine. That Harley was more than metal, it was a living memory. Every scratch, every dent, every polished inch was a story of camaraderie, of battles fought and friends lost. It was a vessel carrying the ghosts of his past, of those who never came home. The shock of seeing it gone twisted into something darker, deeper, rage that burned hot and fierce. This wasn't petty theft. It was a violation of everything he held sacred. To Robert, the bike was an anchor to a life that had nearly slipped away, a tangible connection to the sacrifices he and his brothers in arms had made. It was his pride, his pain, his history. Anger rose in his chest, thick and heavy. He stomped back inside, grabbing his phone with trembling fingers, calling the sheriff's office. His voice was steady but carried the weight of a man whose world had been cracked open. The officers promised to look into it, but Robert knew small-town law enforcement wasn't always quick with justice. Meanwhile, Jake and his friends, oblivious to the storm they had unleashed, reveled in their stolen prize. But beneath their laughter was the first crack of unease. What if this wasn't just some forgotten bike? What if there was more to the man behind it? For now, though, the night was theirs, and the thrill drowned out any whisper of consequence. Yet the town itself seemed to hold its breath. A veteran's legacy had been stolen, and in the quiet Texas darkness, something was about to rise. A reckoning neither the boys nor the streets had seen coming. The news traveled faster than the Texas wind, carried on whispered conversations at the corner store, nods exchanged across front porches, and quiet murmurs in the pews of the local church. In a town where everyone's lives were threads woven tightly together, the theft of Robert Miller's Harley-Davidson didn't just rattle one man's world, it rippled through the community like a sudden storm. Robert was no ordinary neighbor. He was a living relic of a brutal war, a man whose past bled into the present with every crease in his weathered face, every worn-out boot print he left on the porch steps. His story was etched in the memories of those who knew him, not as a distant legend, but as a brother, a father, a man who had fought and survived where many did not. The neighbors gathered in small clusters, voices hushed yet laced with righteous anger. Mary, who lived 2 doors down, wiped her eyes as she recounted Robert's tales from the war memorials and veterans' gatherings. "That bike," she said, voice trembling, "it's more than a machine. It's a symbol of survival, of those who didn't come back." The loss was collective, a wound felt deeply in the heart of their shared history. Meanwhile, Jake and his friends, caught up in their reckless bravado, paraded the stolen Harley around town with a dangerous ignorance. The gleaming chrome, the rumbling engine. It all became a showpiece for their bravado, a trophy to flaunt before the inevitable reckoning. They revved the engine near the schoolyard, weaving through the narrow streets, their laughter ringing hollow against the backdrop of a community mourning a violation far beyond a simple theft. The joyrides were loud, careless echoes that clashed painfully with the silence of loss echoing in Robert's empty driveway. 2 days passed, and the sun rose cold and heavy over Cedar Creek. At dawn, the peaceful neighborhood was pierced by an unusual sight. A convoy of military trucks, their sturdy frames adorned with the unmistakable Marine Corps emblem, rolled to a halt in front of Robert's modest home. The machines came to a halt with a purposeful stillness that spoke volumes. The Marines who disembarked were not strangers, but familiar faces from the local Veterans Association, men bound by unbreakable oaths and forged through shared hardship. Their presence was not a show of bravado or intimidation, but a solemn testament to loyalty and respect. They gathered quietly, the weight of their steps carrying the gravity of decades lived under a banner of sacrifice. Their eyes, hardened by battles both foreign and internal, scanned the neighborhood with a protective vigilance. This was a brotherhood responding to a call, not with guns blazing, but with the solidarity of men who understood loss, pain, and the sacredness of what had been stolen. Jake awoke that morning to the sharp screech of tires and the rhythmic crunch of boots on gravel. He looked out his window and froze. Uniformed Marines stood in clusters along the street, their faces etched with solemn determination. Fear twisted in Jake's gut, a visceral recognition that what had begun as a careless prank was spiraling into something far beyond his reckoning. When the Marines approached Jake and his friends, their tone was grave but measured. They spoke not just of the motorcycle, but of the man behind it, Robert Miller, whose life had been a testament to courage under fire, whose scars were invisible yet indelible. They told stories in hushed voices about the brotherhood formed in the jungles of Vietnam, about nights spent sharing smoke and sorrow beneath a foreign sky, about friends lost and the silent promise to carry their memory forward. Every word cut through Jake's bravado, peeling away layers of ignorance and defiance. The tales of sacrifice and unspoken pain wove a tapestry of meaning around the stolen bike, no longer just metal and grease, but a living emblem of honor, grief, and resilience. The laughter that once echoed on the streets was replaced by a suffocating silence, heavy with shame. Jake's shoulders slumped as the weight of his actions settled on him. He realized that he hadn't merely taken a motorcycle, he had stolen a man's dignity, a community's shared history, a sacred fragment of a painful past still bleeding into the present. The fear mingled with something deeper, remorse, and a dawning understanding that some things, no matter how small or mechanical, carried with them the weight of countless human stories, stories that deserved respect, not reckless disregard. The morning air, sharp and still, held its breath alongside Jake. Around him the neighborhood watched in quiet anticipation. The reckoning had begun, not just for the bike, but for the fracture it exposed in a community bound by honor, memory, and the fragile threads of human empathy. The air was thick with a quiet tension as the veterans gathered in Robert's driveway just before dawn. No flashing sirens, no rattling handcuffs. Only the steady rhythm of boots on pavement and the low murmur of voices steeped in a shared history. The decision not to involve the police wasn't born of leniency, but of principle. The Marines' code was clear: discipline tempered with respect, justice woven through with the chance for redemption. Jake's mistake, grave as it was, had touched something deeper than law. It had touched honor. When the offer was laid before him, return the bike, apologize, and stand alongside them at the morning ceremony, Jake's first impulse was defiance. But beneath the bravado, a flicker of unease stirred. Unease that grew as the weight of the Marine's presence settled around him. Reluctantly he nodded. It was more than a simple yes. It was a crack in the armor of youthful recklessness, a first step toward understanding something far greater than himself. As the sky blushed with the earliest hues of dawn, Jake and his friends found themselves standing in a circle that bridged generations. The worn concrete beneath their feet felt solid, anchored in years of history and sacrifice. The Marine Corps flag snapped crisply in the breeze above, a living symbol of valor that seemed to command both reverence and reflection. Robert stood tall, his posture weathered but unyielding, his voice low and steady as he spoke. "Honor isn't just a word," Robert began, eyes scanning the faces before him. "It's a way of living. It's the respect you give when no one's watching, the choices you make when everything's on the line. I lost brothers in a war that none of you saw, but their memory is carried here, in this bike, in this flag, and in the bond that ties us together." His gaze rested on Jake for a moment, not with anger, but with expectation. Jake listened, the words sinking past the noise of his own doubts and fears. Each sentence was a weight pressing down on his conscience, stripping away the layers of denial he had wrapped around himself. He saw then that the bike was not a prize to be stolen, but a vessel of memory. Each scratch, each dent, a story of endurance, survival, and brotherhood. The leather seat, cracked and faded, whispered of long rides through hardship, of times when the only certainty was the bond between comrades. The ceremony was simple, yet profound. A moment of silence held, broken only by the whisper of the flag and the soft murmur of prayers. The veterans placed their hands over their hearts. Jake and his friends mimicked the gesture with an awkward sincerity that felt like the fragile beginning of something new. The morning light spilled over the gathering like a benediction, washing away the shadows of the past and illuminating a path forward. That day, the stolen motorcycle ceased to be a symbol of rebellion or youthful folly. It transformed into a symbol of respect, respect for sacrifice, for history, and for the chance to make amends. Jake, once blinded by bravado, found himself humbled and stirred by the enormity of what he had almost destroyed. He promised Robert he would help restore the bike, not just as a machine, but as a testament to the men who had ridden it before him. Over the weeks that followed, the town watched a remarkable transformation unfold. Jake and his friends traded reckless rides for patient restoration, learning the delicate care the bike required, the stories behind each bolt and scratch. They listened to Robert recount tales of Vietnam, of heat, fear, loss, and the unbreakable bonds forged under fire. In those stories, the boys found a doorway into a world they had never known, a world where courage was tested in ways far beyond their recklessness. The community, once simmering with outrage, now witnessed the healing of a fracture between generations. The veterans saw in Jake and his friends not just the mistakes of youth, but the possibility of growth and understanding. And the boys saw that respect was earned, not demanded, that honor could be reclaimed through humility and action. In that quiet Texas town, at dawn, justice was not served with anger or punishment. It was restored through compassion, through the grace of second chances, and through the enduring power of brotherhood. Robert's Harley-Davidson roared again, not just as a machine, but as a living legacy, carrying forward the sacrifices of the past and the hope of a new beginning.